Like, how many pieces of content can you actually get from like a 1 hour, 45-minute, 30 segment? Like, what would you say on average? You've been doing this for a long time, just so people really understand what it means to really repurpose and squeeze the juice per se. Let's count it by a piece of content that goes out into a place where someone can consume it. What would you say? Like, what's a number?
Well, I'm going to say at least 100, like at least 100 different pieces of content.
If done properly as well, correctly.
So you've caught on. You've realized that the digital real estate game is taking over the physical real estate game. What I mean by that is every real estate transaction that occurs these days starts with a digital asset, such as this phone. Whether it's an interface, whether it's a software, whether it's a system, whether it's the MLS, whether it's an Airbnb, a Vrbo, it starts with a digital touch point. So in the digital asset series, we are going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about digital marketing. We're going to talk about content. We're going to talk about branding. We're going to talk about the very own things or verticals that lead to real estate transactions, which you will realize that the majority of them are all virtual. This is why we're starting this segment, because as important as we understand physical real estate is and will always be indestructible, because people will always need a place to live, we understand that now technology is playing a whole different ball game in the real estate space, and you want to make sure that you have this on your tool belt and you understand how to leverage these digital assets so that you can have these experiments that can then lead to these physical assets. Now, the same rules of the game apply as they always do in the lab. Get your white coat on, gloves on, notepad, and let's build, y'all.
Real estate experiment. What is happening, y'all? Today, I have the pleasure of having the wonderful Amy Woods dialing in from Manchester. Am I correct?
You are correct, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. This is a special segment brought to you by my team at Invested Talent, which is the Digital Real Estate, as we call it, series, where we're going to talk about some content, and there's no one who is more qualified to talk about content than you, the repurposing queen of content. I'm holding your book here if you're listening. This is so solid. Content 10X. Amy Woods is an internationally recognized authority when it comes to content repurposing, best-selling author, as you can see here. Get your hands on this one. Speaker, podcaster, and an interesting background that I didn't know about. We didn't get a chance to talk about this. The background in management, science, and mathematics. We're going to talk about some ROI too, Amy. We have to. But you took that, you had that corporate experience, and you created an agency. You wrote a book about it. You're serving people, and you're helping them with content. So without further ado, welcome to the lab, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here, and thanks for such a nice introduction as well. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. I gotta do. I gotta tell the people how it is, of course. And Amy, I always like to talk about the person behind the business, because I do believe that we're a reflection of our businesses. So before we talk about how important content is, because we know it's important, you and I know. How did this all come about? Like, did you just wake up one day and you're like, okay, I'm going to turn into a repurposing expert? Like, obviously that wasn't the case, but I do understand that you did have a lot of consulting background experience. You have an ear to the marketplace, to what they might need. How did this come in your world? Because we can share offline and talk about how it came into my world. How did it come in your world?
Yeah, so I can't imagine when I was a young girl being asked what I wanted to do when I grew up. I said, I want to repurpose content. I mean, there wasn't even such thing as YouTube or podcasting back then, so I don't know what that would have looked like. So yeah, my background. So I'll try not to go too far back, but graduated from university, mathematics and management, went traveling. I had a great time traveling, then got back and had to get a real job and start earning some money. I always wanted to have my own business. Actually, I was quite entrepreneurial, but I didn't know what to do or what in or anything. So I got a job as a management consultant with Accenture. It was supposed to be a 2-year thing. Then I was going to go and start my own business, but 2 years became 3, 4, and eventually 13 years as a management consultant. Yeah. So I was there for a long time. And it was
I gotta ask why? Because you had an idea of you were going to do 2 years, 3 years. What was it? Like, was it the experience, the money? What was like, so?
It was It was a combination. So I guess the good thing about management consulting is it's not like having our job. It's not like you go to the same place and sit at a desk, like the same desk in the same building. So every time you take on a new project and a new client, it's a completely different job, a different, often country, city, like team, challenge. So I think one thing is, every time, things were maybe getting a little bit boring or started to think about moving on, you'd start that next project. It'd be exciting, different. It was a career that I guess I took to. So I did well at it, and I kept getting different promotions. So again, like every time you're just about thinking, you get that next promotion and then think, well, I'll stay for another year or so. And so it was a combination of that. It was exciting and fun a lot of the time. It was fast paced. It was always different. I don't think I was with any client for more than a couple of years at a time. So different clients, and I was working with Bank of America, Barclays, Microsoft. Got to go out and work in their HQ in Seattle or Redmond.
Wow.
and out there. Yeah. So really interesting and varied, but it required a lot of travel. So the expectation really was that it was very normal to just wake up on a Monday morning and fly somewhere or train and arrive home Friday night and do that every single week. And you were lucky if you got back on a Thursday night, basically. So at least 3 nights away, if not 4 nights away every week. And I didn't actually mind that if the work was good, but there becomes a time where you start to realize you don't actually have much of a life, really, when friends talk about things that they do midweek, like hobbies and interests, and like, what's that? Like I just work like from Monday to Friday. And so I guess the reason that I stayed long because I enjoyed it, but then in leaving it was the travel, and I had kids. I had one child and another child, so then I couldn't just go away like every single week. And I had this period of ill health, so I'd been well my entire life. Now, I don't think I had barely a sick day in that entire time, apart from when I got poorly. And I had this year where I was having a lot of operations and then having to have all this recovery time and things like that. And so I had loads of time off work. And that's when I just came off this hamster wheel, like finally came off the hamster wheel, because I had to slow down. And that's when I guess went back to, it's time to leave anyway. Like I don't want to carry on being a management consultant that isn't willing to travel as much and things like that, because if I'm going to be one, I want to be the best I can be, and not say, well, I can only be away 2 nights a week and things like that. So I guess I became really interested in this concept of online business. And I remember actually, like, I just had this operation and I was on my phone, and I discovered like Gary Vaynerchuk and Pat Flynn and Amy Porterfield and all those names that you just find as soon as you Google online business, how to start an online business, things like that. And I got introduced then to, I hadn't heard of a podcast, so podcast, things like that, and immersed myself in that world and decided, right, I want an online business. So initially I thought, well, I'll start an online business in being a business consultant, but take like business consultancy in an online capacity. So I'll create a course, or I'll run like online coaching and things like that. And I tried that for a short while. And I kind of niched down actually into like much smaller businesses. But it was when I was doing that I started creating all this content. So I was really bought into the concept of, you've got to create content. And I was it's the way my brain works. I think through the consultancy, I'm very process driven. So like process improvement. So I thought, right, I'll go live on Facebook and I'll turn that into a YouTube video, and that will become a blog post, and that will become these videos and this, that, and the other. So I developed this ecosystem of repurposing for my own content in doing that. And that's when I realized I wasn't passionate about that business that I was running, but I just had this light bulb moment of actually all this repurposing of creating one piece of content and then turning it into lots of other content. And I had a little team helping me, of freelancers, like a designer helping me, a copywriter helping me, a video editor, and all of that. And I thought, actually, imagine if you just had like one supplier, one person that you sent the content to, and they managed that team of multi-skilled people who can repurpose, and then it all just came back. So that's when I kind of thought, right, I'm going all in on this. It's the only thing I felt passionate about in terms of all this thinking about what I could do for online business. And I guess I could soon given up on, create an online course. It'll make money while you sleep, like the Amy Porterfield, sales pitch and things like that. I realized I wanted a tangible, kind of real business with people and customers that I'd get to meet versus chasing all these online sales coming through. And so, I guess the long story short after that is I went to this mastermind with Chris Ducker, who, do you know, are you familiar with?
I know.
Okay, yeah.
Chris
So
well, yeah.
I went to a mastermind. Yeah, we've talked about Chris before. So I went to this one day mastermind. It's just this one day that he was doing in London. And I presented it as an idea there. It was just a glint in my eye at that stage, but I presented it. And I think I'd run a few trials with people I knew. So I presented how it went, feedback I'd got, and just asked the room. There was only 6 of us in the room. And everybody said, including Chris, I'd be a customer, I would. I think it's great. So that gave me the I guess the confidence then, okay, I'm on to something. And then that was it. I kind of just walked away then from the old career, went all in on Content 10X. And actually that was 4 years ago, because we've just passed our 4th birthday. So that was 4 years ago.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's a great story. And what I love about it is, and I had a feeling you would say this, is you're scratching your own itch, and then you're like, oh, interesting, this can work, it's very similar to kind of like what I came across. And I think that's from that background of consulting. I don't know if you know, but again, I am a consultant by trade as well. So if you guys don't know, offline, Amy and I are just twinning. At least I'm trying to be like her. So that's really funny. But the really cool part, so that's so interesting. So you literally, the interesting part is when you said you listen to the marketplace, you asked, is this something that would serve you? I think that's really important, because sometimes we really don't do that. We have these ideas and run away with it, but you haven't given the marketplace, you haven't listened to the marketplace, which I think was very wise on your part. So you talked about, it is Amy Porterfield, that's right, another Amy, and Gary V, content. Why is content so important? Amy, please tell us.
Well, I think, content is so important because it's so many reasons, isn't there? Where to start? So in terms of when you are trying to grow a business in particular and run a business, and you want to get people to know you and like you and trust you. I know it sounds really cliche, trust, but I don't think there's any other way that you can truly do that other than through content, because when people discover you, when people land on your website, when people Google you, when people hear of you, they try and find you through your content. So they will discover you and then immerse themselves and decide whether they like you, whether they trust you, whether they want to work with you. So I think if you're comparing, two businesses, one that doesn't really have any content at all or very limited, and one that's really content rich, you're already going to win, provided it's good content, if you've got lots of content. So firstly, I think there's that factor. But then I guess going back to even be found in the first place, so for people to find you, to put your message out there in the world, we do that through content as well. So, it's really important to get found. It's really important to gain trust and for people to get to know you. And I think it's really important for you being able to control what you're known for as well. So if you're creating content that you specifically know that you want to become known for this, that you want people to come to you to ask these questions, that people to see you in that way, to ultimately hopefully want to work with you, and there's no other way to do it really than through content. So I just think it's it's so important. And I know there are some business models and some business types that perhaps don't rely on content as much as others, but certainly many businesses and many industries and personalities, personal brands, etc. It's a big content play these days, isn't it? And it's very much kind of quality content as well.
Yeah, well, it's so funny because I wasn't even going to go there, but you mentioned the keyword personal right? Which is big now. Personal branding has been big. And I love what you said about, how people associate you with what you do and who you are as the expert. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think there's a big difference between Coca-Cola and Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Personal branding versus corporate branding. Which do you think in this day and age, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong, but I'm curious, what do you think is probably the most powerful weapon to have or tool to have on your tool belt, if you were to pick one right now, personal branding versus corporate, and why? I'm curious.
Well, I guess it's really tricky, because it does depend on, I guess, what your future plans are with the business, if it's your business. And I know that a lot of people are quite concerned, a lot of business owners are quite concerned about going all in on the personal brand play, because perhaps down the line have intentions of selling the businesses and moving on. And then if the business is based on their personal brand, then what would be the value of the business if they're taking themselves away from it? So I know there is a big concerns about that. And we mentioned Chris Ducker before. His big thing, he would say that you future-proof yourself by creating a personal brand, because whatever future endeavors you go on to, if you have this strong personal brand, people will kind of come with you, and you'll already have this head start. And I see two sides to that, because that's all well and good if you go on to do something with a similar audience, otherwise if you take a complete like 360 and the audience that follow you aren't that related to future endeavors, then perhaps you may have a bit of a head start, but still a little bit of a challenge on the way, and you might struggle to sell your previous business because it was very personal brand heavy. But I think I don't know, it's a funny one. So more people follow Elon Musk than they follow like Tesla or SpaceX on social media.
I literally just said that on a talk when I was in Nashville. And so where are you going with that? Because I don't want to interrupt that thought process. It's so interesting.
I was to say that's really interesting, and I think I've heard, I haven't done the maths or look, that more people follow Richard Branson than all of his Virgin brands put together. And there's other like loads of examples that you could go to of that. So a lot of people would therefore say, well, it's the personal brand then, isn't it? Because when things go wrong with Teslas, Elon has such a strong personal brand that when he makes a statement, people listen to him. Whereas there'll be like another big business where the CEO never creates any content. No one really knows who they are or anything. And something goes a bit wrong and the CEO makes a statement and no one knows, likes or trusts that CEO because they're not a public figure as such. And they don't necessarily believe, that maybe that things are going to turn around and things like that, because it's who is this person, whereas there it's like, well, it's Richard Branson, it's Elon Musk and things like that. So I think where I'm going is I think it's proven to be valuable and important and make a big difference to have a personal brand. But then I think you strategically do have to think about where your business is going in terms of how much you align that personal brand completely to your business. Should your business be named you? Should you be front and center of it? Yeah. Or should you try and grow it in a parallel way so that there's not a complete dependence on you and your brand as your business grows in case you want to walk away from business? So I think it just depends where you want to go, I think. Yeah. Managing it in two different ways and in parallel, but just not having too much dependence.
That is such a good answer. And it's so funny because I've had, I was speaking about this in Clubhouse. I'm going to forget who the name of the gentleman is. And I asked him this question, high level guy. And he said the way he looks at it is he uses his personal branding eyeballs as a platform to then introduce his companies and ventures and projects. And I think that's honestly, and again, this is my opinion, that's probably the best way to do it, because what I do like about what you said is you got to also know your end goal, right? And this is what I learned at a very young age when I had started, I was a personal trainer and I started a YouTube channel called Ruben Fit Kanya. Well, yeah, that's going to be hard to sell, right? Because then the next person, and so that's one thing I always remember, never put your name, again, this is my personal kind of opinion, in a business, because on the exit strategy, if you're trying to exit, that's one thing. But then if it was just you bringing all the value, then it's harder for the investors to see, well, am I going to have success without Amy there? Am I going to have success without Ruben there? So it's such a good point. I think it's to your point, it's knowing where you see the exit, start with the end in mind, which is what we talk about with content. You got to know the end goal. What is the end goal of your content? Because if you're blindly creating content, you actually don't have a roadmap. So it's actually a very similar concept in everything that we do. Comes full circle.
I think that it's a funny one with the whole name, that like, should you have your name in? Because like, I still think that if you did go the route of having your name in the business and then you started to step away, there's loads of examples where I still think that is okay. As in, McDonald's, like McDonald's, well, that was named after the McDonald's brothers, wasn't it? But I can't remember the whole story. But I bet we can, if we did a quick brainstorm now, I bet we could think of like these like massive businesses that are like, it's the surname or the full name of the individual, but it's not like a Fortune 500 company or whatever. And you certainly wouldn't expect that, or that they've sold out now. So, but yeah, I guess it can work, but you'd have to manage it. Like you said, like you would just have to manage it well, wouldn't you? And there'd be a point where you would go through rebrands and things like that, and you'd still manage to do it effectively. But it's probably not the best decision to make. But hey, every time you say that, somebody else will probably come and say something different.
Yeah. It's remarkable though, actually, because I think what we're really talking about is the influencer marketing too that's taking place, and I think it's interesting because I kind of I was digesting when you said you better hope that it's the same audience that you serve, but it kind of made me think, and I have this with my friend as well who's investing in some things. I'm like, I don't know anything about what you're investing in, but I'm invested in you. Therefore, I'm going to invest with you, which is similar to CEOs. Like, I know that, Amy, I know your core values. I know what you stand for. We have a good rapport. I know that you're going to have success in whatever you start. So I believe in you. So I do think it's also like, that's interesting you say that, because I think I'm leaning probably more towards the personal branding without being so attached so that it's still a sellable asset.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't know if it's still popular in the US, but in the UK, Dragon's Den, Shark Tank.
Yeah, of course.
A number of times that the investors will say, they'll say, I don't like this idea that you've put in front of us, but I want to invest in you. And like, maybe they'll have mentioned some other idea, and they'll say they'll almost invest in them, won't they, and admit that they're not actually going to be investing in this that they've just put forward in the Shark Tank, whatever. But you are so investable, like you're so investable. And I think you're right. It gives you a head start to just be known, liked, and trust, and people trust you out there, and you have a reputation, don't you? You build this reputation, and it makes a massive difference. And having a digital footprint as well, just having that, being Googleable and trying to control that and things like that as well, it's a big thing these days. It's only going to get bigger, isn't it? So
I love that word, by the way, digital footprint. I'm going to take that from you. That's awesome. So yeah, in your book, you talked about maximizing reach, generating leads, right? When it comes to why content's important, increasing revenue. You talk about, growing your business. Okay, let's talk about it now. So what distinguishes good content from great content? Is there something that comes to mind with you? We talked about the roadmap. How would you answer that?
I guess what distinguishes good from great, I think great is when you get somebody to feel something in the content, when you cause some sort of emotion, whether it's that you make people feel fired up about something, feel excited, feel intrigued just to find out more, whether you make them laugh, some kind of emotion. Angry, even if you want to polarize. But if content just washes over people and it's like, Blair, just like, scrolling along and the thumb doesn't stop and it just kind of washes over, or, people feel a bit empty at the end of watching that video or listen to a podcast. If you're feeling empty, they probably don't listen to the whole thing. But I think it's when you cause an emotion, and even better if that emotion leads to an action. So you got somebody fired up and the action led to them going and booking that meeting with somebody, even if it's not you at that stage because you were sharing a tip or advice, or you made them think, wow, like the moment I get home I'm going to start doing that differently and I'm going to tell my team about this and things like that. Or just inspire, but it can't wash over. Like, it has to cause an emotion that causes an action, I think, in like the great content that we see out there.
That's so interesting you say that, because we were just talking about offline. We were talking about you know, masterminds and mind shifts, and I do think you're 100% right. It's how that people will always remember how you made them feel, and planting that feeling seed with then good quality information that's addressing aches, pain points, obstacles, which we all have feelings around. I think you just helped us put the formula together 100%. That's what it is. It's the feeling. And I can definitely attest that, because I was talking about like how the mindset shift I was having with my coach and how I was so bought in. One thing that we, and I know we didn't necessarily talk about this, but you do talk about in your book, is content allows you to also, form that relationship. One of the things that my coach says is, when I get on a phone call, most people sell, I close, because I have a core content that's already pre-framed my buyer or customer or whoever the case might be. Maybe you're trying to actually, you're trying to help someone in the coaching. Do you have any additional thoughts on that? Because I know you talked about it in your book, and I can't plug it enough. Content 10X, of course.
Thank you.
There's so much good stuff in there that you talk about. But because we're going to get to the repurposing piece in a second, and I want to create a little bridge. What is it that it does for someone when you're creating that content? Would you look at it as that forming a relationship without even having physically met them?
Yeah. So have you heard of this, like the Google study that they coined the term like zero moment of truth, like ZMOT or ZMOT, whatever, but the zero moment of truth. And it basically was this study that Google did, and they determined, so it was called like 7, 11, and 4, and they determined that for people to really feel like they know somebody, they need to spend 7 hours with that person in 11 different interactions in 4 different locations. But the beauty of this is that isn't like the old days of 7 hours on the golf course and 11 interactions and, meals and all of that. This can be achieved online. So we can feel, if we spend 7 hours with somebody through listening to their podcast, watching their videos, social media, 7 hours in total of time with that person digitally. And then if you think about it, I guess this is like the bridge to repurposing, but then if you think about, 7 hours and then 11 interactions, that could be different podcast episodes or different videos, different Instagram posts, etc. And the different locations, again, we've just named different platforms, so you're hanging out with them on Apple Podcasts, but also on their website and also on YouTube or whatever. But when you do that, you create this feeling that you know that person as well as if you had spent that time with them in person. The brain doesn't actually distinguish between whether it was in person or not. So when a celebrity like dies or something like that, and we cry and get upset about it, and we never ever met them before, our brain doesn't actually know that we didn't meet them. Our brain thinks of all those hours that we spent together, like all those precious hours that we spent with Kobe Bryant or whatever it may be. We didn't, but our brain thinks we did. And so with content, it is that, isn't it? Like, to your point about, if you get on the phone to somebody who's been consuming your content and they've achieved that zero moment of truth because they've had that 7, 11, and 4 and more, then it's like meeting an old friend or something like that. So if you sell into them, the question's probably more going to be a few clarifying questions than the close, versus the entire dance of getting them to know you and like you and trust you, and then go to like questions and close. You're already there, aren't you? You are at their zero moment of truth already, basically. Are they going to go ahead or not? They've probably just got a few questions to ask you, and that's it. So I think it is everything in how you what content can achieve.
That's so good. I had never heard of that. I mean, you put it so clearly. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And so we talked about that being the bridge of repurposing. So that's 7-11-4. I'm going to remember that. That was very well explained. So as far as we talked about it, right, and we're using this word, this term repurposing, but someone who's listening or watching us right now may or may not know what that really means. In a nutshell, what does it mean to actually repurpose content? What are the benefits of it?
So I think what it means is it means to find creative ways to communicate a message in different formats and different locations. And it's all about, therefore, expanding the reach and how you connect with people. So they're the benefits. You're expanding your reach to a broader audience, and you're expanding the way that you connect with that audience as well, because we all connect with messages and content in different ways. So some of us prefer more visual, someone more oral, some are more like they prefer like tactile. Everyone learns differently, listeners, readers, writers, etc. And so we connect with content differently. And if you repurpose content in different formats, you're just going to establish a stronger connection with all the different types of learners out there. And the reach will help you too. But I think it all comes down to all forms of content are a form of communication. Like whatever content is, it's trying to communicate a message in some way. So the simplest, format of repurposing is just mixing up and changing, communicating the very same message, but in that different format and in that different place for that extra chance of reach and connection with an audience. And, the benefits then, as well as reaching and connecting with more people, you're going to, from a business perspective, potentially improve your chances with SEO. You're going to improve your chance of becoming known because you're going to have the same message out there in multiple places in different formats. So people are going to start associating you more with what you want to become known for. And so much more. But it all kind of comes down to that, really. We expand the reach, expand your chance of connecting, with the message that you want to control and get out there into the world.
Absolutely. So you talk about different formats, communicating a message in different formats. Now, if I'm listening and I hear, okay, that's interesting, I'm starting to put the pieces together. I heard emotions, I heard keywords. What should that message be? If I'm listening, I'm an established business, or maybe I'm just getting started, what are some key points or frameworks or areas where I can start thinking of what I should be including in my messaging? Is there anything that for you that you feel comes to mind as our must-haves?
Do you mean in terms of when the business is trying to kind of frame, so what would I communicate? Let's create content. I know I got to create content. Yeah. I know I got to be everywhere. What am I even saying? So I think that what you need to do, if you're kind of thinking, right, what would I create content about? Where would I start with a content plan? A great starting point would be, and if you have a team, preferably doing this with a team, but doing a brainstorming session on what are all the questions that our ideal clients ask us. So like, what do we get asked time and time again? And how do we really help people? What answers do we provide that are really, really helpful? And really, really plan that out and break that down to a granular level, not like really big questions, but more like, well, that's a big question. What are the 10 sub questions that we generally get asked when we're providing our answer? And try and come up with, like, go for 52. So go for 52 questions that you get asked. And if you were doing this in a bit of a brainstorm, if you don't have a team, then even just like with peers, colleagues, masterminds, things like that. But you'll come up with a year's worth of content if you come up with 52 questions that your ideal clients and your perfect clients ask you. And I think that is then your content plan, because you want to be showing that you're the person who can answer all of these questions, and all that content coming out showing that you answer these questions. This is what you know. This is what you know. That's going to start attracting the people who ask those questions, and that's your ideal client base. So I think that is a really good way to start, and maybe then categorize the questions. You could theme them a bit. So we came up with these 10 questions that seemed on this theme and these that seemed on that theme. And then, start to kind of maybe think, well, we'll do the first quarter on that theme, the second quarter, so on buying houses, on renting houses, on preparing houses for sale, whatever it may be. But I think that is a really good way of devising a solid, starting content plan.
I couldn't agree more. I think you nailed it on the head there. And I'll piggyback that by saying, one of the things that we do as well as, and because this is going to tie into what you said, which is so important, is to understand the language that they're using as well in their aching points and obstacles. So one of the things we do is we actually ask them, like, what are you struggling with? And it's like, it's, in real estate, it might be investing into a home. Are they using the word investing, or are they using the word buying? Because if they're using buying, use buying when you're answering their question. And it seems very obvious, but it's not if you're not paying attention to what they're saying. And I know you had mentioned keywords before in SEO, so I think that can really help, bring that home. That what you're saying is literally think about those 52 questions that they're frequently asking, and then think about how they're asking and the language that they're using. I think that's incredibly powerful. Love that 52. So you went there, you talk about 52 should be good for the year. Now, there's listeners out there, I know you might relate because, you have a mathematics background as well. People are thinking, okay, ROI, what's the return? What's this, blah, blah, blah. That's our, our avatar, of course, and our audience. So let's put some things into perspective here. So we're recording right now. Best believe it, guys. We are going to repurpose this. This, Amy and I, for sure, because we preach what we practice. But to someone out there who's listening, what can they think if it's like a 45 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour? Like, how many pieces of content can you actually get from like a 1 hour, 45 minute, 30 segment? Like, what would you say on average? You've been doing this for a long time, so people really understand what it means to really repurpose and squeeze the juice, per se.
If you had a fairly long form piece of content, so say like a 45-minute video, there's loads. So it depends how much time you're going to put into the repurposing, doesn't it? Because you can stick with the video content. Let's just say it was video. You can stick with video to begin with and create lots of teaser videos. So lots of short social media videos. And let's not forget all the different types as well. So stories for Instagram, reels for Instagram, main post videos for Instagram, then let's go to Twitter, let's go to Facebook, and so on. So just remembering that even one single social platform has different ways that videos can be used. So you could create lots of different types of videos and different snippets for all the different parts of different platforms. And then moving away from video into more social bite-sized videos, repurposing video into a podcast episode. So then you've got another piece of content there, podcast, then turning that into long and short form types of written content. So turning that one same video into a long form blog post, but also could it be more than one blog post if it's quite a long piece of content? Then maybe there were, 3 key ways that the conversation went that could become 3 different blog posts. Could be a post for Medium as well, or a LinkedIn article. So not just thinking about your own blog post, but are there other articles and places that you could submit written content to? Then short form. So, let's start breaking that down into a LinkedIn post, into, you said, if we want to numbers, maybe like a 45-minute episode could get you a nice, healthy bunch of 20, 30 tweets or something like that. If there were so many different great quotes.
That is one platform. That is I just really want to put that into perspective. That's one platform. You said 20, 30. So in total, if we're including all platforms, what would you say? Seriously, what's a number? Because I think we've done the math, but it depends how you count it too, because you can count it by platform, but let's count it by a piece of content that goes out into a place where someone can consume it. What would you say? What's a number?
Well, are you counting a tweet as a piece of content, or shall we?
Absolutely. If it's gonna, if I'm a tweeter, I'm a tweeter.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say at least 100, like at least 100 different pieces of content.
If done properly as well and correctly. Yeah,
exactly. I think so. I think as long as there's not a compromise on quality. So
absolutely.
as long as everyone, you know, I don't know what your opinion is on this, but you know, there's certain types of AI software where you'll put in a blog post or an article and it will spin off a load of tweets for you, but it doesn't necessarily always choose, like it'll just pick
the right
two
context.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what you're talking about is the context of the content, which goes back to here's my thoughts on that, Amy, because this is such a good discussion we're having, which I love. I knew this would be a discussion. It starts with what we said earlier, your avatar, right? Like if you know who your audience is, I mean, literally, I feel like if someone's new to this content, we've dropped so many nuggets that you can take this entire segment right here and it will serve them, right? There's just a nugget after nugget after nugget. And I think if you understand what questions that we have a strategic framework that I use, like if you're literally trying to create content to serve people, then lead with the FAQs you just talked about in your interviews, right? That's going to lead to then answers serving them directly. So to your point, it starts, quality is going to be, very, it's going to reflect based on the questions that you ask and based on you knowing your avatar. Because I do feel that, if you take one form of podcasts or whatever, and you don't know your avatar too well, and for those who are not familiar with the terminology of avatar, that's just knowing who your dream customer is, right? What their problems are, where they're at in their business, where they're at in their journey. If you don't know that and you put a podcast together and then you use that tool, well, that tool is going to take things that are not really even going to hit anywhere, right? And I think you would agree to that. But if you literally have golden, like just a bunch of gems, because you know your audience very well, you know what questions you're asking, then I think that tool is only going to take good things from it. It's going to be like, 10% of the time there's something that really wasn't important. So I do think the onus is on, again, this is why I went back to the roots of what you talked about. You can repurpose content, but are you repurposing good content? That's why I asked you what good content was. And your answer was emotion. And your answer was, asking the right questions. So I'm trying to help the audience to bring it back full circle. Listen to Amy. She knows what she's talking about.
I would say that like another thing is that is a massive thing for me is, and it's platform specific. So it's really understanding and respecting the different platforms and knowing why a person is on Twitter versus why a person is listening to a podcast versus, and not just kind of slapdash copy and paste because it was a video. It can just become a podcast episode by extracting the audio and that's it, versus actually like making some platform specific adjustments, things like that. So I think as long as you respect like each platform. So I did a post about this the other day. I think it was a podcast episode the other week about how I was listening to a podcast the other day and it was a repurposed live stream and they didn't say anything in the start about it being a live stream. It was, you just listen to this podcast, but then it was just so funny because the guest had internet issues. And so I'm a podcast listener, but I'm listening to them going, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can hear, yeah, like, and all that. And then he dropped off. So his internet disappeared. So the host ad-libbed for like 10 or 15 minutes whilst the person came back. Actually, it can't have been that long, but it felt that long because it was painful. And then the person came back and he was like, oh, you're back. He's like, oh yeah, sorry, my internet dropped. And I guess where I'm going is, I couldn't believe, like, why would you not just edit that out? Because you can't help what happens in a live. So like total fair play to the live. The live is the live, and people watching it live on LinkedIn or wherever it was, well, they know what they're watching. They can see there's been internet issues. We're all human. But then if I was turning that into a podcast episode, I would get out the bits where the guest disappeared for ages, where they had tech issues at the start, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know why, but if for some reason they had a reason why they didn't feel that it should edit all of that out, at least at the start, I would say, this is based off a live stream. I do apologize for all the issues. And I'd probably jump in at certain points and say, sorry, like about these issues. It was a live stream. We had some tech issues. So that's my long-winded way of saying, like, I found that annoying because I wasn't being respected as an audio listener, because I didn't need to listen to all of that. The live stream people would be accepting, or they'd go. But then if that video was to then go on YouTube, again, I would just expect, do some editing, because a YouTube audience doesn't need to see tech mishaps either. Like, that's the beauty of post-edit production, isn't it? That's why the beauty of it. Why would you keep those in? And then, so I think it's like respect the listener if it's audio, respect the viewer if it's video. If it's Instagram, remember why they're there, versus if it's Twitter, remember why they're there, versus etc. So remembering quality, and remembering it's not a one size fits all copy plus paste like process that you follow, but you're taking quality and then spinning it into more platform specific quality. Yeah.
That's I mean, to me, I'm like, X, if you're listening to this, speaking of respecting, I'm throwing up a big X in the camera, like, that is bad, no good. And maybe it was a slip up, but again, what really you're saying is you got to respect the context of the platform, which is interesting. And another thing that, on that note, I think Russell Brunson talks about this, and you touched on this, which is interesting because you kind of tied it together, and I'm going to echo it in a second. But Russell Brunson says, people who listen to podcasts, listen to podcasts. People who are on YouTube, go to YouTube. But you said something key that was interesting. It's when you said the, I think it was 11-7-4, I think.
Yeah.
You're kind of also traveling with them. Like, if I'm on YouTube and on podcasts, well, now I have these two touch points with you, which I never really, thought about it. I think you put it into context very well. See what we did there? So that was very interesting, because I can agree with you that I've met, these people. I can think of one person that I met that had been following for a while, had bought his course, had consumed his content, all that. And it literally felt, I didn't want to let this one slip through the cracks. Like, I knew him, and I was like, and I told him, I'm like, this is so weird. I feel like I know you. And it was just so cool. So that's really, really interesting what you said, though, about, respecting the context, and maybe I'm traveling with you, and I'm also meeting you on different platforms too. So it brings it full circle that you want that experience to be a quality experience wherever that person goes.
Yeah, and I think that you have to remember where people will likely first find you and how. And it's not likely that people will immediately jump into your long form content. Like, it may be, of course, like you might get recommended somebody's podcast, and the first thing you do is you go straight and listen to an episode, and that's great. That's a referral, and you go and listen. But I think most of us discover new people on our phones in some kind of bite-sized short form way, don't we? We'll discover somebody with a short video or a short tweet or something, and if we're interested, we might start to follow them. So start building up. This is 7-11-4, but we might start to follow them, and I might get to a point where I've liked someone's Instagram content for a couple of months or 6 months before I think, you know what, I might actually start listening to his podcast, and then I'll go on that journey of becoming a long form, and then I'll think, wow, like, why was, his podcast is brilliant, and then I'll, maybe sign up to that free course or something like that. It takes time, doesn't it, to go on that journey. It's like like starters and mains and desserts and all of that, because I think absolutely. you do, and so you have to kind of think back as to, you should put lots of time and effort into your long form pieces of content, but you should never neglect anything shorter, because it's the way that people will ultimately migrate is through the quality of short to lead to long. In most cases, I'm sure we've all listened to someone's podcast sometimes when we haven't ever seen them on social because of a recommendation, but that's a little bit different. So
yeah, I think I was looking down here at the book, because I think you had mentioned somewhere in your book where literally that small, sometimes that repurpose piece is actually even more powerful than the actual long form piece. And it's your point, it's where you're meeting that listener or whoever or watcher in that journey. Maybe that point struck a chord. So you can't ever, one outweighs the other, short or long form. It's very interesting.
Yeah, we've got a client who often gets, like say more views on like the audiograms that we create for him on LinkedIn than he does downloads of his podcast. But that doesn't matter because that's leading to business for him though, because like it's all taking place for him on LinkedIn anyway. So there's a lot of people who respect and admire the fact that he has this podcast and love listening to these snippets of him doing these great interviews on LinkedIn, but they're not podcast listeners. So nothing's really enticing them to go and listen to the podcast, but that he's getting more views on these audiograms and building this. Then he's being asked to speak at events and he's getting clients and things like that. His reputation is growing. So I always find it quite interesting, thousands of views of that audiogram and hundreds of comments, but only like a few hundred podcast downloads. But that doesn't matter. That's not the metric that we're actually measuring there then, is it? Because we're measuring metrics that move his business along, and he doesn't want to become the next Joe Rogan or the next biggest podcaster in the world. It's all to grow his business, and if that's happening through the repurpose content, then great, so.
I love that. So you went there. So I gotta ask you now, because I think it's interesting. What is like the coolest story that you've heard from one of your clients or even yourself? And I can speak for myself as well, where content, I was like, I cannot believe this. This literally happened from like social media. Like, please share with the audience. Is there anything that comes to mind where like, that is the coolest thing in the world? Maybe someone like landing a deal or a client or a special gig, or maybe who knows, a life partner, like any fun stories that you can recall?
Did you say from like a client that we work with?
Yeah, it could be that. It could be yourself,
generally?
anybody. I mean, content, this thing is so powerful.
It's so funny. I mean, I know I know when I spoke to Amy Landino, she met Vin, her husband, on Twitter. So that's through content, and they met on Twitter. Wow. So that's funny. I don't know. I feel really under pressure to think of something cool now, even though I feel like I've got lots of cool stories in me, but I can't actually think of them off the top of my head.
I have a cool story. So I Googled content repurposing because we're into that. You guys know my agency does that for real estate thought leaders. And I met this really cool individual called Amy Woods. So then I bought her book and I'm like, there's no way. Then we started messaging each other, helping each other in our businesses. And now we're on the air. So you see how this comes full circle?
Yeah.
That's my story.
Yeah,
just saying.
Story back. Yeah,
just
exactly.
saying. Come on, that's what I was hoping. I was hoping you'd say it. I'm like, I got to meet Ruben Kanya.
Well,
live.
We're on this podcast now, aren't we, due to content?
Come on now, Amy.
Loads of things like that happen though, don't they? It's like,
absolutely.
It's this small things, isn't it, like that are really cool, and you realize that you know somebody because you met through content, and me talking to you, all the other people I can think of who we met through some form of content. And I don't know, like last year, I felt like with some of our clients, they used to have a lot of events and they couldn't reach out and they couldn't connect with the people that they would have connected with in a face-to-face way. And they were so bummed about it, and like, what are we going to do now? And then maybe, launched that podcast or start creating video content. And then towards the end of the year, couldn't believe how many new people that they'd met and how they didn't feel so disconnected after all, because the funny old thing of the content actually grew relationships and, people getting in touch. And, the person I just told you about with like more people viewing his audiograms on LinkedIn than listening to his podcast, in a really short amount of time, he was being asked to go and speak at these events all over the world, just because he raised his profile through his podcast, and people heard his voice in a rather, in an industry that didn't have things like podcasts, and suddenly, just being brave and putting himself out there too. And people liked him, people wanted to go for a beer with him and things like that, and enjoyed. Yeah. So I think it's, crazy.
You never really get to know who's listening. I think that's the crazy cool part. And my listeners will appreciate this. I think, I had someone who is listening to my podcast, and it's I'm talking about like episode 3-4, like super early stages, didn't know anybody was listening, reached out via Instagram after, ended up being in the meetup, turned into real estate business that's currently happening now. Real estate development's happening now in June. Got him into his first duplex as well. He's selling his, then doing a 1031 exchange on the, like, 100% this was from a podcast, and a podcast, like that was the touch point, and we repurposed it on Instagram. And so I think what Amy said too, that's really key, is it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. I had a guy who came in, who was talking about like first year of podcasting. People are literally calling him and they're like, setting up an appointment. He's like, let me tell you about myself. He's like, oh, no, it's okay. I listened to your 20 episodes. Like, I feel like we have a great rapport. Like, can you add me to your buyers list? I'm like, what?
Wow.
So it's just, I do want to say this though, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this. The whole consistency thing, because one thing that you said was that, okay, you met someone, or maybe you watched a little snippet and then you tapped later down the road into their podcast and then you're sold on that. And so the fascinating thing is, and I don't want to quote Russell on this. I don't know if it was Russell or someone else again, but I think he's at the top of my mind because I was listening to his podcast today. But it was something to the extent of, or I think it was Dana Derrick's Dream 100. But he said something to the effect of, no one ever discovers you at episode number 1, or at least rarely. It might be like episode 40, 50, and we're talking about podcasts, but maybe for posts, it's your 30th or 100th or 300th. So the point here that he was making is like, if you're thinking of like, oh, like this is my first one and I haven't gained any traction, my first repurposed post or my first podcast or my first YouTube video, when we watch TV, we'll discover movies like when tons of people have watched there, or new series that, okay, I've heard about it, now I'm going to tune in. And I just think it's so important to think about that, of like, when you're thinking about this like a marathon, what's the best advice do you give, Amy, as far as when you need to think of this as a consistent thing? Like how important is consistent?
I think consistency is really important for a few reasons. I think it's important for you as a person to just develop that, make it habitual, like turn the content creation into a habit, because with everything, with fitness and whatever, like if we don't make it part of our routine, it will just fall off and we won't stay consistent. So I think for us to commit to consistency is really important. I think stay in front of mind. So from an audience perspective, stay in front of mind is really important. So if I discovered that person on, say, Instagram, and not maybe continue to really like their posts for months, quite frequently seeing them and starting to look a bit more and maybe starting to engage, if it had just been once in a while, like once and then a month later and then a week, then a month or something, it wouldn't have been front of mind enough to really have any impact. Then also bearing in mind that we don't see everything that's posted as well. So if you think everybody sees everything that you post, they don't. We're all busy. We miss things. Like algorithms as well don't show everything to everyone all the time. So it get even more important to be consistent, to be front of mind. Then I think that when you start to grow that audience, people like consistency, like they like to know that their favorite, I was going to say TV show, but these days, what with Netflix and Prime, we don't tend to like have a favorite show that we watch at 7 p.m. every Thursday or whatever, do we? But we know what I mean. Like people do look forward to knowing that you release that video every Wednesday or whatever. People get excited about like the fact that they know we're creatures of habit and we like to know what's coming as well. So people like to enjoy that when they go from just being aware of you to becoming more of a fan, and then the regularity. People are more likely to subscribe if you're consistent. People are more likely to hit that subscribe button or whatever it may be, hit that follow button if they see that there's something consistent going on here. You're more likely to get that. Then the bots and the algorithms and everything, they favor consistency too. So when they see quality and consistent content coming out, that they are more likely to give you more reach when they see that there's more consistency. Of course, they favor quality more, but there is and some appealing to them to see that you are consistently using their platform and you're consistently bringing something for them. So the bots like it too. And then I think it's just like when you're growing an audience, it's like a promise, isn't it? Like you get to the point where you can't stop. Then I suppose it becomes that promise that you make, and that you need to kind of keep that going and And it's presence promise, I suppose, isn't it? Like when people have subscribed and people have gone from cold to warm to they've subscribed and they're looking forward, you don't want to let people down then. So, and then just the person that I am, I think that when you build consistency into your content creation, it's easier to get help. So if you want to hire some help to help you with the creation, it's far easier to hire help and have a nice network of people around you that support you, or hire in a person in-house. If you have consistent content, it's a bit more tricky to have a support network if they don't know when the next piece of work is coming from you to support you on. So you can get more help if you have consistent content, and you can develop better systems and processes, because ad hoc here and there, random acts of content, there's not much of a system and a process going on. But if you have a system and a process, then it's easier to work with. You can get people to help you. You can ultimately scale up or whatever. So from a business perspective, as well as all those different angles, from a business perspective too, I think it's a worthwhile kind of commitment to go upon. And like you said, we all have to start somewhere. I think it's so funny when everybody probably ponders, should they go back and delete like the first whatever, like 30 that went out, because they just cringe at the very thought of their first pieces of content. What do you think about that? Like, I'd love to know what you think. Have you ever gone back and deleted?
No, that's like deleting your journey. It's like when you ask someone, it's like, would you ever change a thing? You're like, no, I wouldn't. And I think what happens is, what's fascinating, I've heard listeners say it's so refreshing to see your growth. I think when you can show that and lead and show that, I think the best thing we can do, and I know Gary Vee, we mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk, but it's really important to be vulnerable, like on the air, right? Like one thing I always do is, the lab, we feature experts like you. Amy Woods comes in because I'm learning from you as I'm listening. And if you're very upfront with that you're learning, I'm figuring this thing out. It's a new application. Hey guys, sorry about I had some internet issues. I'm still figuring out this tech thing, or my camera. Like, people aren't going to embrace you for it because they see a little bit of themselves. So I would never know. I think what people will see is like, wow, episode 1 and now episode, 130. Wow. Like, look at that growth, because those are my core values. And I want to lead with my core values to show that I'm not perfect, but I put my one foot in front of the other and will follow. And I think that's good. I mean, I can't think of an example, and maybe this is actually going to lead into my next question for you, Amy, is like, is there any industry or any specific brand where this wouldn't be good to like this, like if someone's listening, like, okay, that's nice, you guys are in marketing, or that's nice, you guys are in real estate, or that's nice. Can you think, because I can't think, and maybe I'm jaded. I'm thinking, is there an actual industry where someone can sit back and be like, nah, this content thing ain't for me? Like, I'm really trying to play devil's advocate. Is it? Like,
I don't know. I mean, I suppose that the only, like, not necessarily industry, but the only businesses that I think I could understand them saying this content thing isn't for me is if you have never created any content in your life and your business is doing amazing and you've got metaphorical like queue out the door, and there's nothing that you want for nothing with your business, then no, of course, like, why would you go and spend your time doing something else? Because clearly everything's working. So
everything's perfect. No like, more leads for me, none.
I think like some physical businesses, I don't know, like as an example, I don't know, like if I walked past my local hairdressers, let's say, and so that's a totally different type of business, and they always look around, and you hear that even if you wanted to go to that hairdresser, you'd have to wait ages to get on the wait list because the hairdresser's oversubscribed or whatever, then no, I wouldn't think that, like, of course not. That would be mad, wouldn't it, to say you should start a podcast or blog? They'd be like, but I've got a waiting list. So it's not a business like type as such, is it? But I feel like it'd be madness for me to kind of say to a business that is doing better than they could ever need to do, start creating content, because if they were like, we're absolutely fine as it is, then fair enough.
So that's interesting. It's interesting because I think the only thing I can think about, Amy, is I just had a client talk about this. Like, he's a very super high, like, he's doing business with people who are like in, you know, wheelchairs and I shouldn't say that. When I say that, I'm thinking like super, you know, super old, maybe antique, like not in like in touch with technology, perhaps, right? And I do want to go back on that when I was saying, you know, I was thinking old and I was thinking that, so I don't want to offend anyone. I think that I got to be very careful how I use my words. So that's what I meant by that. So very antique, very old. And so one of the conversations we were having, I'm like, that's interesting. I'm like, continue to do what you're doing, because these people are, you know, they're like, maybe they're not on LinkedIn, they're not on Facebook. They're not. However, this came to light, and this is very interesting because I've seen this happen. You have to think about, if you're thinking of bringing new blood into your business, whose attention can you capture now that will grow with you? And so here he was, he's here, right? But when those people, he's done doing business with them, then it's going to be a complete like dip where no one knew you or of you, especially if you're thinking legacy, right? And so that was an interesting conversation that we had, because it was like, it was a complete different avatar, but it's also playing the long-term game. And I know a few people, right? Like, I can name drop for our listeners. You guys probably know who Grant Cardone is. Grant Cardone, again, I admire him, respect him very much as well. What he's been able to do, he's a real estate guy, but he tapped into the branding very, very hard. Now, when he's doing, if you're listening, because this, I like putting things into context. He has a book, it's kind of actually hilarious, such serendipity. It's called The 10X Rule. Right? Not to be mistaken with Content 10X, y'all, if you're listening. It's different. Content 10X is by Amy Woods, which you need to get your hands on. But the 10X Rule is by Grant Cardone, and that's a book where it's kind of introductory, blah, blah, et cetera, right? And I want to kind of give you the ladder here. So then there's that. And then there's like sales courses, because he was a sales guy, so you can tap into that, right? Then there is a go to growth con. So you tap into, he definitely knows about the zero, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher it, the zero
moment of truth.
He knows what he's doing, right? So he does that, right? Then once he helps you sell to have more money, he gets you into his masterminds, and then his masterminds help you then invest with him for multifamily apartments. So if you look at that, I might be 22 when I meet him. And it's actually, you know, very similar. I might be very, very young. I read the book, that's interesting. Then I get into sales, and he's growing with you, and he's taking it through a different journey. He's taking that person through a different journey, so that when you are in maybe, I don't know, 40s, 50s or whatever, and you can afford to invest millions with him, guess what? He's built rapport this entire time, more than enough, and you've become like family to him, right? So I do think if there's someone who's listening and you're thinking about bringing new, fresh blood, and this is something that just kind of occurred to me, because I was sitting there with this client. I'm like, this is interesting, because I'm not here to like be like, yeah, you should produce content if it doesn't make sense. What Amy said, like, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. I think it makes sense for most businesses, but it was an interesting shift in my thinking. I'm like, but when you're done working with these people, what about the people that could have been aware of what you're doing, especially if you're thinking long-term for the growth of your business? So I just want to leave that out there. I'm thinking, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Amy.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point in terms of like the longer term and thinking about the life cycle, I guess, of the customers you work with. And also, I guess, just thinking about as well, you know, the comment I made on if your business is great where it is, but it still comes down to if you're thinking of doing something different with the business in the future as well, doesn't it? So say that hairdresser with the queue out the door and it takes you ages to book in with them. That's all well and good for physical people appointments, but let's just say that they one day aspire to close the salon down and have a YouTube channel teaching people how to cut style hair or something like that, just making it up. Then of course, even if you had the queue out the door for the people who live within a 10-mile radius that are willing to come and pay, if you're planning on a different angle down the line that would want a online audience or anything like that, then you should still be thinking about growing right full circle, but the personal brand or whatever, the content, things like that. So even then, like you said, thinking about the full life cycle and the new breed of clients coming through the door, and also your longer term view of, just because I'm doing this now this way, what will I be doing down the line, and should content come in now to benefit me, in like years to come, when I'd have a whole treasure trove of content to go back and depend on as well. So it's interesting, actually. Even if it looks like someone's got a queue out the door, content could still help them with the longer term plans.
Absolutely. I'm going to lean on what you said earlier with the personal branding aspect, because I don't think there's anything is bulletproof. Like if you're like a really booming business and then the pandemic came, no one saw that, and you got to pivot. If people know you, you might be able to pivot into another industry. So I would say, that personal branding part, I think echoes with me there. And when I think about it, if your business is truly bulletproof, I want to tap into your network, because
exactly.
I that's good for you, and I want to learn how to create a bulletproof business. But I do believe that we should always, you can never have too many friends, I feel, to a certain extent.
No,
I think to a certain extent.
Yeah, but it's always good to know that you've got a broad, wide network to lean on, isn't it? And it must have been when the pandemic hit, and if people were starting to really worry about what they were going to do if like their business were affected and stuff, I can only imagine how worried people were if they opened up the metaphorical black book and there was barely anyone in, and they felt like, I've never really built much of a network, versus the people who just thought, well, I can get some messages out there, I can book some calls, I can do this, that, and the other, and just feel like I'm going to completely lean on my network here, and something's going to come of it. So there's definitely something to be said with like the more people that more, I guess like valuable people that more valuable connections that you have, it all pays off in the long term, and you equally hope to reciprocate and help anyone in your network as well, don't you? So I think that even for the most kind of introverted people, it's always really important to put time into making sure that you're growing and building a valuable network that you can help, and that they can help you, and you can all bounce off each other. Like, aren't we lucky that COVID happened in 2020 when we had the internet? Because I couldn't imagine what would be like in 1990 or 80 or something.
The previous pandemics they had. Stop it. Yeah, we have, guys, we are spoiled brats, okay?
No, we are, aren't we?
Like, the fact that, like, what a time to be alive, seriously. We need to be grateful for every day, not only for our health, right? For everybody who's out there dealing with, complications, and obviously who have lost loved ones. It's a very serious thing. I don't think there's any technology or time that's good for that. But as far as, overcoming and being able to pivot or being able to stay in touch, like I'm still FaceTiming my little nephew and all that. I mean, what a time to be alive, right?
I know,
For sure. So it's funny. So I was going to ask you this question, but I think we've touched on it fairly well. And so I'll just let you, maybe shed some light on it if you want to. But, and I always play devil's advocate because I think it opens up a different part of the mind. Is there such a thing as an oversaturation? Are we too late to the party? Like, and the reason why I say I think we answered it, because we talk about the other benefits behind content creation, like means to an end, networking, even meeting that one extra person, right? It's not about the likes, it's, doors opening, etc. But do you think our voices are getting drowned in what's turning to be a bigger pool? Or do you actually think, no, actually, Ruben, there's more consumers than creators? Like, what are your thoughts on that, Amy?
I think that I don't necessarily think people need to worry about oversaturation in terms of, they'll always keep being music, and people don't get sick of music. So I'm glad that new artists don't decide that, there's enough music in the world, I won't put music out. And there's always going to be more books and more movies and things like that. So in the digital world too, I don't think that there's any difference there. But I do think that it's really important with some kind of types of content, if you're worried about oversaturation, to be super specific and super niche with the content. So if somebody told me that they were going to be starting a business podcast, and it was not to any particular industry, or any, you know, particular market, and it wasn't about any particular aspect of business. It was going to be just like general conversations about everything to do with business to every industry out there. My advice would be actually, I think it should be something really specific. Like, I think you need to get down to more specifics, because to stand out and to try and find an audience, I do think the more specific you go in certain mediums, the better that you will do. So it's
riches
not
or in the niches, right? That's what they say.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you know, it doesn't have to be like, you know, it could be on the horizontal, could be on the vertical, could be a bit of both and things like that. But yeah, I don't think really general helps. It needs to be more specific. But yeah, there'll always be music, and there'll always be books, and there'll always be movies. So I think they can still carry on being all the other videos, online videos and podcasts and blog posts as well.
I love your analogy. You have a very good way of doing that. You put things very simply, and I really got to give it to you, because you do a really good job of putting things into perspective. That's 100% right. Tons of music out there. It's never going to stop. So, and all the other benefits that we talked about aside from the visuals that we see, likes and stuff, etc. Interesting. So we got to get the rapid. I literally could stay on here online with you for a long time. We've already been online. We were chatting off before we even hit the record button. So I want to thank you so much for your time, but I have to ask you and go through the rapid fire round brought to you by my team at Invested Talent. This is very interesting. This is going to be a quick hitter as to I want to see the behind the mind of Amy, what she thinks. Okay. So if you could pick one social media platform for your business, right? Just one, maybe for your book or just your business in total, which one would you pick today and why?
So if I could pick one, it would be LinkedIn. And it would be LinkedIn because as much as I enjoy other platforms like Instagram, well, really Instagram, I quite like TikTok as well. I don't like Facebook. Because I enjoy other platforms, I like Twitter. LinkedIn is the place where if I was to study my avatar are more likely to be on LinkedIn. We're more likely to engage there. And I guess I just find it better overall for business. Like I find I have really good business conversations on LinkedIn. So yeah, the others I find fun and great, and it's nice to meet some people, but yeah, like it's more of a business place for me, LinkedIn. So it would be LinkedIn.
Good. And just to give you a quick plug, I believe you have a resource on your site when it comes to specifically repurposing content on LinkedIn, correct?
Yeah, well, it's a service that we have actually. So it's called like LinkedIn 10X. And it's for all the reasons that I just said, actually, like for our clients too. If we look at the clients that have really managed to, it's so cliche, like move the needle, but like I've really managed to make a difference, move the needle. But
see that for our listeners, I think Amy cringed there.
That has
said that. Sorry, I think we're delayed. I was saying to our listeners, I think you said
I did cringe when I said
Amy was cringing, just so you know.
I cringed. But yeah, LinkedIn, it's the business. I just think it's for B2B anyway, in particular. It is, I like what they're doing. I like how they keep bringing out, new enhancements as well. They're not just kind of resting on what it is. It is getting better. And it's just a place where I see more like traction with people's businesses and growth with people's businesses over the likes and comments and shares that you might see on Instagram and the tweets and retweets on Twitter, but it's got to be LinkedIn.
Let me ask you real quick on that LinkedIn topic real quick. You said you have great conversations on LinkedIn. For someone who's listening, what is that like? Is that like that typical DM of, hey, I have this for your business, blah, 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 like automated? Like how are you cultivating relationship conversation? Is it with existing people that you know, where you're kind of tagging them and you're including them in a conversation? Is it DMing people? Like what's one thing that you can, obviously people can tap into your resource and your service at content10x.com. But as far as a nugget that you can leave with us, what's one thing that you find works well when it comes to LinkedIn?
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, no, not DMs. I actually haven't done any DMing really on LinkedIn at all because I really I hate receiving them myself. Like if it's from someone that I don't know, I hate it so much. They usually just get like a disconnect, but only if they've literally just connected with me and then immediately try and sell to me. I just like, oh God. But no, I mean more just like commenting on people's content and having conversations. So it's more about that. I think it's more about just engagement and just, publicly engaging. People engage with us and our content, we engage with their content, and then I like to kind of see what's going on. I feel like I always find new people. I learn myself through other people's content because it's good quality content. If you manage to control your connections and your feed and things like that, I'll usually learn something new myself when I get onto LinkedIn. So I think it's more about that. It's just the engagement. It's liking and sharing and commenting on other people's. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend going into people's kind of private messages and things like that. I think you should, even if you have a bit of a good conversation in the comments and things like that, and then maybe message to say like, we were just talking about this, and if you have something that you want to speak privately. But yeah, I think it's more that, because I do think that the downside of LinkedIn, like the plague of LinkedIn, is these awful automated systems that people will use that just, automatically hammer your inbox with completely like non-targeted, non-specific, like salesy messages. And I wish that would stop, because I think that is probably the most negative aspect of the platform, and what puts a lot of people off is that their inbox gets spammed so heavily. But if you can move on from that, I think there are good techniques as well as the bad ones that kind of ruin it for a lot of people.
Yeah, got it. Second question. You're the repurposing queen, right? Respectively. So, but I got to make it hard for you, right? You're stuck on an island. You only get one form of content that you can produce. Which one do you pick?
Oh, one form, video. It's going to have to be video.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Why, real quick?
Well, I was going to say it's the most repurposable, but if you're saying that I'm not allowed to repurpose as well, then
no, it's fine. Just take it as I asked it. That's enough. So, that's good to know. I think that plants the seed.
Yeah, the most repurposable, because you can get the most different types of content from a video. And I guess I think it's just probably the most likely to establish a good connection with people if you can create video content. So it's not to slam the other forms, but if I'm pushed to it, then I'll say video.
Right, exactly. We did push you into it. We said one island and one format. So absolutely, you were pushed. Favorite book, Amy?
Ooh.
I know there's so many out there, but is there one that comes to mind?
Wow.
Fine, I'll make it easy. You give me a business book and give me a personal, because it sounds like you were going towards the fiction.
So there's this book I've read twice that I really like, called The Longest Day. And it's about the D-Day landings, and it's about what happened on the beaches of Normandy that day. Like, it's just telling the whole 24 hours, and it's really good. Really recommend it.
Okay, got it.
It was fascinating. I was staying in a house in Normandy, and this book, the owner just had the book, and it was raining, so I just read the whole book because it was like chucking it down with rain, and it was dead good. And I've read it a few times, and I really, really like that. And then the business book, there's not like one in particular, but the book that got me inspired to like do all of this, start my own business and everything, was Rich Dad Poor Dad, actually.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's a very common one for the real estate industry.
Yeah, well, here, so. Robert Kiyosaki, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just remember so vividly taking that on holiday with me, and just made all these decisions on that trip that I was going to do. And I still refer to it all the time. Even when I'm making financial decisions, I'll think, what did he say in Rich Dad Poor Dad? And I'll make decisions based off some of that advice. So Yeah.
He's
So it's
a
got to be
rich dad
that.
of many. Rich dad of many. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we know that you have an agency, which we'll definitely include if you're driving, listening to this. We'll include those in the show notes. Keep your hands on the wheel for sure. But we'd love to know, that's at content10x.com. Now, as far as the software, what is one software that you feel like is in your agency is it's your baby? It's what you would pick over anything. Is there something that comes to mind?
Well, at the moment, I would say that it is ClickUp, actually. I think it's been a life changer. It's fab, isn't it? So
It's amazing.
yeah, all the other ones they're changeable, like we can use different tools for this, that, and the other. But yeah, I'm really impressed with ClickUp and what we've done in a short space of time with it. So I'd be really sad if someone took ClickUp off us.
Yeah, no, ClickUp is great. Amy and I were talking offline. I'm like, hey, I got on ClickUp. She's like, me too. So it's good. We got two content creators who are in the space who are using ClickUp, and it's good for any business, really. I mean, it's a smooth version of like Monday.com. It's really cool. So check it out, guys. Yeah. As far as if you're ready to describe the impact that repurposing content has had for you and your clients in one word, what word would you pick?
Ooh, for me and my clients, in one word, I'm just going to say profit.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Say no more. We'll leave them that. We'll leave them that hook. Your favorite content creator of all time, is there one?
I don't know really.
Who you're inspired? Maybe it doesn't have to be all time. That sounds a little overwhelming. Is there one that really inspires you, a content creator out there that's doing a good job?
Oh, this is really tricky because I'm trying to think. I'm not very good at like following lots of content creators because I tend to be quite fickle and jump about. Zach King. I really like Zach King. Do you know Zach King? This isn't business related, by the way. He's just a really good creator because I love watching his short videos. They're like magic. If you've seen they're basically magic, like illusions and stuff. So I like.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay, I gotta check it out.
You gotta check him out on Instagram or TikTok. But he does these really, and YouTube as well. So like he's just really creative. Like I really love to just see his next like crazy video that he does. And then. Yeah, I've just gone, I'm sure you're the same. I've gone through phases of people that I've followed. So I used to like, Pat Flynn in the early days. Not that I don't like him anymore, but you just move on, don't you? So I used to like Pat Flynn, used to like Amy Porterfield and I don't know really.
That's good. Zach King, we'll check it out. I always like to hear what
he's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I always like to hear what you're being inspired by and moved by. But listen, you've inspired us, you've moved us yourself in so many different ways. You've taught us the importance of repurposing content. You've taught us the importance of mindset, business, systems, softwares. I mean, where can we find out more about you? I mean, I know I've plugged the book. The Content 10X is here. If you're, we'll include that in the show notes if you're driving or wherever you're looking at this. But you definitely want to get your hands on it. I certainly have them. I'm tapping into it in different parts, jumping around. Definitely dove into the podcast section. I know that'll be big for the podcast content multiplier community. But as far as content10x.com, what other things you got going on, as far as what's next for you? What can we look out for? Where can we go to tap in more into your world, Amy?
I think you're absolutely right. It probably is just content10x.com. In terms of what's next, watch out on Instagram at content10x because we're going to be doing like a big reels type strategy where we're going to be having a go at a really good crack at Instagram Reels and seeing how we do with that.
Good for you.
We're doing a big rebrand, which goes live soon. So there'll be a new Content 10X look and feel coming out in the next week or so. And yeah, other than that, just carrying on the podcast and like social media. So yeah, content10x.com is probably the best place to go. Twitter for a bit of a chat. Instagram, sometimes I try and be funny. It doesn't always work. And then LinkedIn for, good old conversation about anything, to be honest. Like I like LinkedIn, as I said. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll definitely make sure we tap into your network there and follow your lead. I think you're doing a wonderful job. That's why I had you on my platform. And again, I got a chance to learn from you. So I want to thank you personally so much for adding so much value, forming the relationship we've had digitally, right? Which is really super cool. And continue to inspire. Again, I want to encourage everybody to check out content10x.com. Tons of resources and tools you can tap into, and then get your hands on the book for sure. And Amy, for the rest of our listeners and creators, we will create on and see you on the other side.
Hold up. We've come to the end of the Real Estate Experiment show, brought to you by my team at investedtalent.com. However, the show will certainly not stop from here, because you will share this with someone who was not in the lab with us. Any value that you found was helpful, any experiment that you feel can benefit someone else who was not here, please share it with them. And number two, definitely leave us a review. It helps us and it helps other people find our show to benefit from experimenters like yourself, right? We are trying to build an experiment nation where the experiments that you resonate the most with, you will double down on. That is the goal. Now, the reason why the show does not end here is because my team at Invested Talent repurposes this show so that other people who are not consuming the show, either by the medium that you're consuming it now, whether it's a podcast, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram, wherever you are, we will take clips from this show and repurpose them and amplify them, put them on multiple social media platforms so that the message and the experiments can be consumed in a way that fits the person best. Now, if you'd like to have the same for your brand, make sure you go to investedtalent.com, where we've helped multiple thought leaders in the real estate space repurpose their content so that they can grow their brand. We specifically work with people who are looking to have an impact, whether you have an existing show or a brand new show, whether it's a podcast, whether it's clips or interviews or episodes. We will take that raw content and repurpose it on multiple social media platforms, because your voice, your experiments need to be heard in the marketplace so that we can all have an impact, so we can impact others and we can all elevate together. On that note, make sure you tune into the next one. Let's build, y'all.